Okay, since there's spontaneous silence that has come over the crowd, I guess that's our cue to start. I'll just start by briefly introducing myself. So, Tanse Kyle Kakeo Kilau, Kathy Nitsigason, Okiniso Chinia Maga Saskatchewan Active Nuigan Megawatts. So my name is Kathy Walker. I'm originally from the Okinees First Nation in Treaty 4 territory, but I now live in Saskatchewan in Treaty 6 territory. And I have the honor of being the Treaty Commissioner of Saskatchewan. And I want to thank Colleen and the organizers for inviting me here today to help chair what I think is a very crucial panel when it comes to issues of peace and security and women. And so I'm going to let the panelists introduce themselves, but I just wanted to mention that the title of this panel is Lessons and Priorities Concerning the Crisis of Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women, Girls, and Two-Spirit People. And this is an issue that's really prominent in the work that I do as Treaty Commissioner. From a treaty perspective, a lot of the violence stems from violation of the treaty relationship, of the treaties. And there's been a lot of great discussion this morning in presentations on how the erasure of the experiences of Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirit people is one of the major issues that perpetuates the violence. And I would include, the erasure and silence of treaties and treaty histories along with that. It also very much contributes to that history. To the violence. But before we get on with things, I also wanted to acknowledge an honorary panelist who's in the crowd, Kytwayhat Georgina, who's sitting over there, and she also got the red dress memo. Unfortunately, Sheldon did not. Anyways, but thank you, Georgina. She's also on our Office of the Treaty Commissioner, Elders Council, and provides a lot of great insights and teachings to us in the work that we do. So thank you, Georgina. And I also want to, of course, acknowledge Darlene, my sister in spirit. Darlene Okmesi-Sikak has also been a great teacher for me and help and support in the work that we do. So thank you, Darlene. Okay, so now, I'm just going to ask the panelists to introduce yourselves. And also, if you could just explain how this issue, crisis, epidemic, pandemic of missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls affects or influences your life or the work that you do.
Ani Tanse, I'm Maswa, also known as Pelletier. I'm a retired sergeant from the RCMP with military background as well from my teenage years. Because I couldn't get a job, the military was willing to have me on as a reserve member, which actually provided those funds. So as a First Nation visible woman, I think I dealt, again, with a lot of discrimination growing up as well. Georgina Maswa is my mama. So seeing what she did growing up, she opened and knocked down a lot of doors, doing what she did in her lifetime and continues to do because she's going on 55 plus years within the justice and social system. I was lucky enough to be actually nominated alongside of us. Both of us didn't even know we were being nominated for the Queen's Platinum Medal for the work that we did in the area of justice, and we actually were presented at the same time. I didn't even know that kind of thing until the day previous to that presentation. So it was pretty cool for us to do that. So generational work continues. Of course, too, as all Indigenous people will tell you, we all have a connection to the Indian residential school system, the day schools. We are either survivors ourselves or we're children of survivors of those systems. And that goes along with missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls and two-spirited. We all have relatives, close relatives, sisters, mothers, cousins, loved ones who have been affected by this. So there's not one of us that goes untouched. That is our reality, kind of thing here. We're also considered the scapegoats of Canada. You blame the victim, and that's the mentality, right? It's the victim's fault. The victim here is considered to be one, not good enough, a baby maker, a drunk, illiterate, stupid. Everything you could think of negative is put on Indigenous women and girls and two-spirited. And that has been constantly taught to immigrants and settlers coming into this country, as well as, one would say, practiced since first contact. So that's how I'm affected by it, kind of thing. I've affected it by it personally. There's people in my family who have gone missing. I was affected by it through my work, kind of thing, as an RCMP member. I also worked with the Regina Police Service before the RCMP. So constantly being treated less than, constantly treated as you only got hired because of the color of your skin, kind of thing like that. You can't be smart enough. You could go on and on and on, right? So that's how I'm affected by what we're talking about today. Merci, Joe. Merci.
Danse squeak. Everything is today we do the Annan roads. And I'm happy to be here today. Greetings to all of you women, all my relatives, and my sister, Georgina Masqua. My late brother, Simon Kytwayhat, adopted her as our sister. And when my late brother passed, and she became my older sister, my mentor, my protector, somebody I kind of rely on for support. So my name is Emma Kytwayhat. Kytwayhat means the messenger, like the in-between person. And that was my grandfather's name, his Cree name, because all of us, like Karen mentioned her Cree name, we all have spirit names. I have a spirit name. I have two actual spirit names, and I think maybe because I need protection, so that's why. And one is the one who sits with the thunderbirds, that's Suapios. And the other one is the one who sits with the rattles, which is Sisiwan Apios. So I go to sweats, and and ceremonies, and that's where these names are important. And I come from Magosagayan First Nation, that's in Loon Lake, Saskatchewan, close to Meadow Lake, 2.5 hours here. And I grew up with mostly brothers. I did have one older sister, but she passed from cirrhosis of the liver early in her life. And so she had 6 boys. So my parents, they raised these boys, and I was in there too helping. And so I grew up with boys, and when I graduated from high school, my father sent me out. He says, "It's time you leave. We have raised you. We have given you the skills. Go out." It was getting kicked out of the house. Right? It was like, I was kind of sad because, I had to go out, and I did come out, and I went to university here, and I always wanted to go do the military, but my dad wouldn't let me. I think he figured I was going to go out shooting people in different countries, And anyway, so I came to school. I thought, well, if I'm not going to be in the military or in the police force, then I will go to law school. And I got my BA with a major in history and a minor in political science. And I think the reason I picked those was to find out why this country was, the history of this country, and why all of a sudden there were treaties, and why the indigenous peoples were treated like, I can't remember, the professor from here was saying about terra nullius, yes, that this was an empty land with nobody here. And so that's what I explored, and I did write a lot of papers during the time I was in college, in university. And I really had really supportive professors, and I did get some really good grades on my, even though they were kind of radical in a sense, And I still have some of those papers because I like looking at the A+ or A-. And then as a summer student, you get these summer jobs sometimes, and I happened to have a summer job with a special constable program, maybe a summer student with the RCMP, and then they were starting the special constable program, and after that I applied to go do the RCMP as a special constable. Am I talking too long? I was supposed to just intro ourselves. And this was after my father passed, my sister passed, so I was sort of in this limbo of, kind of, what am I going to do now, So I did go and do the RCMP, I think, more for security. And also, back in the 70s and in the 60s, there were a lot of, they said, police brutality, right? There were these natives being thrown into jails. Every time there was a hockey tournament, there would be natives full of, in these jails because of intoxication, because of fighting, I suppose. And I always thought, why are they treating these people like this? These are people I know, people, brothers or people from my community I know are decent people. I use that word. And so I think my objective when you do the RCMP was to find out how do these people think? What is in the history? What is in the, what is in the training? So I went in with these questions, but once I was in there and I had to go through the training and see what it's like, are you being taught to be really mean to people, to throw people around? And then when I went out there, and I had my language was really strong, so I was able to communicate with where I was stationed at with the language of those peoples, and so I had to do it differently. I cannot, throw people around and too skinny and too not strong. So I had to do it differently and prove to these people that, hey, you could still arrest people, charge people without, throwing them around and without, treating them as if they're less than you are, or, that they're criminals. And so I stayed in the force for 27 and a half years, I think more for security, but I also became an instructor at Benjoe as one of the instructors in the academic section, like in the law section and stuff. And in the meantime, I had completed 1 year of law school before I went into the police force. But then I started thinking about coming back to school, and I did come back, and I did get my law degree finally. And so as a teacher, as an instructor in the academy at Benjoe, I instructed a lot of cadets who were not Indigenous. They were, I hate to use the word not white people, but you know what I mean. And also different races from Chinese, and that was, I never had a chance to teach Indigenous peoples. It was always these, and I did teach them, and they became like my babies in a way. It really, sometimes I think, oh my God, so-and-so is going to go to, Magua, and I know the people are going to be kind of mean to them, and, I kind of became protective of these cadets, right? So that's where I retired from this at Benjoe. And then I did my articles at the Justice Department in Saskatchewan, and got my pass to practice. And I became a prosecutor in Meadow Lake for 1 year, had a 1 year contract. Then I had a conflict with one of the other prosecutors, and it was a woman. But most likely I was too sensitive. And then my contract was not renewed, so I was unemployed after that. And then I kind of got sick a bit after that. I think it's from all the stress and everything. And then one day my brother said to me, my younger brother says, why did you go to school then if you're not going to use it? Oh, so then I started picking up cases. Then I started having my own business. That's the defense counsel, right? And all of a sudden I'm defending these people who are these men for beating up their wives. I'm defending them. I thought, oh my goodness, how am I going to reconcile this, this dilemma? Because before I was prosecuting them, right, for beating up their wives, and now I'm defending them. And then I thought, well, they're paying me. I have to, do the best I can because that's what they're paying for. But in the meantime, I will tell them, you should go and take this anger management course. It's going to look good in front of the judge. Or you should go for personal counseling and bring me a certificate. And that's how I, kind of make them go for house recourse in court. And, what was I going to say? And I got sick back in 2022, and I had cancer, so I gave up my license, and then I had to go through the treatment with cancer care, surgery, chemo, and radiation. And I just, all of 2023, I was dealing with that, and all of 24. And then I thought about, should I, get the license again, go back to practicing. I think about the court system, it is so strict. I mean, like the Congress was saying, it is so, you cannot be talking about theories and stuff in court. You have to have precedent, you have to have facts, you have to have plans. Otherwise, the judge doesn't listen to you. I mean, and I have been almost cited for contempt of court many times because I tend to kind of argue with the judge or argue with the prosecutor, almost sometimes getting into fights in court, and we kind of back out. I mean, but we call each other my friend. My friend is, saying this. I mean, that's so weird. They calling somebody friend and you're actually arguing against that person. So here I am, and my sister invited me to be here. I didn't know about this. I didn't know this has been in existence for 25 years, because it doesn't reach us out in the grassroots level. So now I'm trying to help women at home in different communities that I go to for ceremonies and stuff to get together and somehow start something, but right now the crisis is dealing with children, and until things are more, I suppose, quieter or more, I'm always speaking Cree at home, so now my English language is sort of suffering a bit. And so before it was like, when I was stationed in China, there was no Cree speakers there, so I had to speak always in English, right? I couldn't speak in Cree. And there were times when when I started speaking Cree again, when I went home, my brother would say, "What did she say? Why did she say that?" And I just realized I used a swear word instead of the Cree word. It's so you have to be so careful in how you pronounce things. And you could say it, like I was saying, one time we went to Watchers to a car dealership, and my brother and my sister-in-law, and I said, "Oh, there's this old lady here, the Manitou lady, Sirisage, you're supposed to say Sirisage, kind of like tiny, right?" And I said, "Seaweed," and I swore, I said, the women's female organs, and this is to my brother. I thought, oh my God! But anyway, these guys will understand. So anyway, I shouldn't talk so much, but that's my life story. So I'm happy to be here, happy to listen to you guys, but sometimes it goes over my head because, I haven't been in that sphere for a long time. Sorry, but thank you.
Sheila from Saskatchewan, and Bonnie, soon they came to Manitoba. We just this well and we anyway. Hi everyone, my name is Sheila North. I'm from the Bonnie Cree Nation in northern Manitoba, and I was given the name Wikas Godesqua, which is sweetgrass woman. lovingly, and I'm just learning to embrace that name. I'm also from the University of Winnipeg currently. I'm working there as an Executive Director of External Indigenous Relations and Special Initiatives. Before that, I was a journalist at CBC, off and on, and also with CTV for the last 15 years before I also became an elected leader in Northern Manitoba for Manitoba, Kytwayhat, and I was the first, still the only female Grand Chief from our organization up north in Northern Manitoba. I'm also a mom and a cook now of an almost 5-year-old, or he says level 5. And I also remember and acknowledge my dear mom, who I called before I came here, and I told her how beautiful this place was. And interestingly enough, on my way here, I was praying and hoping that I wouldn't mess up or bore you. But I'm thankful to be here. Thank you to Colleen and all the organizers for having me here, and all the panelists. I feel very privileged to be here with you. But as I was driving here last night from Winnipeg, which is where I live now, our oldest living matriarch passed away. Her name was Rosie. And on the same day, which is why I drove in late, one of my nieces graduated from her course. And both of these women are significant into the topic that we're talking about, because we almost lost my niece a few times. It's only been 2 years that she's been on the right path, and to see her graduate was something very significant in our family, because she fell into the lifestyle, the issue around missing women. And I hope I'm not sharing too much information about her, because she's still very embracing that road. But also my Auntie Rosie, she was a dynamite lady. She traveled right until she couldn't travel anymore. And both represent strength and beauty in many different ways. And the way I'm impacted by the issue is, I grew up in my community, Benjoe Nation, and I went to, as a 15-year-old, went to Winnipeg to go to high school because I thought I wanted to be a doctor someday. I tried it. I have the ick factor. But I found out later, but going from my community, from Benjoe, the safety of my family, even though my family, a residential school survivor and a day school survivor, got together and had a bunch of kids, they were the best parents I could have ever asked for. And we grew up in a beautiful home that never had any negativity. We never saw them swear or fight or drink or anything. And yet, when they let me go to Winnipeg, I was treated completely opposite, and I was out of my element, and I was almost a victim of taken off the streets a few times. And so, going forward, I didn't graduate, and I didn't go to high school or university or anything. I had my children first, and lived life. And when I finally started to ground myself and pursue what I wanted to do was journalism, that's when I realized I was a survivor of the issue, because I started working on the stories. And in 2012, I was pulled into politics to become a communications officer for a Grand Chief at the time. And Idle No More was just getting going at the time. And I knew that Idle No More and the hashtag was impactful, so I thought that we should create a hashtag on MMIW. So that's, at the time, I created that hashtag. And coming here and seeing just the signs outside and seeing MMIW used everywhere is just amazing. And I'm so proud to be part of this conversation, and I look forward to the rest of the process.
Kerry Benjoe, Nidasigas, and Muscopeding Ochinia. My name is Kerry Benjoe. I'm from the Muscopeding Soto First Nation in Treaty 4 territory. I am a residential school survivor, a day school survivor. I often bring up the fact that I lived through the era of segregation. I was born in Missouri. When I got sick, I went to Indian Hospital. When I needed to go to high school, the only option was residential school. And I think it's really important to always bring that history forward, because when we talk about our Indigenous history, it's always in the past. I lived through it, And so that's when I'm in a room, I always bring up the fact that that history is not long ago. That is our lived experience. That is my experience. And I don't consider myself that old. I have relatives who are younger than me who had the same experience. And I guess my interaction, my how MMIW has impacted me came later in life. But when I reflect back, I realize that MMIW, the issue of murdered missing Indigenous women, has always been in my history. It stems back, way, way back. My 3 times great grandmother, Saskatchewan, and my 3 times great grandmother, just my maternal side. My mother's great great grandmother, my mother's great great grandmother on her maternal side. They both fled the U.S. during the Indian Wars, and they ran across the border. And so it's that history of being hunted and being killed simply for existing, for being brown, being Indigenous, that has always been in my family. But for many years, I didn't realize that it actually impacted me. When I was in residential school, one of the things that our CCWs, it was child care worker, that's who supervised us, would tell us when we did leave the school, if we came to the city, make sure you pack your ID. So if you go missing, we know where you are. And even though MMIW wasn't a topic, it was something that was taught to me. I know my mom would tell me that to be careful. Always watch where you are. Don't go with strangers. And she would say, like, if you go missing, nobody's gonna look for you. The police don't like Indians. So this is the history that has always been. I'm sorry, I'm a little emotional. I just had my mother's 1-year feast yesterday, so it's just on my mind. But as you can see, I'm an amputee. When I talk about understanding what MIW was and everything that is involved with that, my wake-up call came when I was in the hospital and I had to make a decision on whether to keep my leg. And it was broken, my foot was broken 4 years prior. I had walked around on a broken foot. I was, as a working journalist, I worked at the Regina Leader Post. I was the first Indigenous person hired at the Regina Leader Post, and it's a 125-year history. And during that time, my first marriage fell apart because my husband at the time didn't want me, he just wanted the little girl he married. He wanted me to stay at home, and I had gotten an education because I was smart, and I wanted to do that. And so I got my education, and this opportunity came up, and so I just did it. And I really love journalism, and he's seen me changing into somebody he wasn't used to. And our marriage fell apart. And because I was with him so long, I really didn't have that experience of, dating or anything like that. And I fell into a relationship with a person that was a friend of the family. And so there was that relationship there, there's trust there. And what had happened is it was a violent relationship. It didn't start out violent. Very slowly, very incrementally, the violence increased. And I stayed silent. I stayed silent through the hair pulling, the pinches, the pushes, the shoves. And I changed my behavior because it was always my fault. It was, you did that, you made me mad. And so I changed my behavior, and soon I lost who I was. And there was a lot of shame because I was a journalist. I was supposed to be the smart one. I'm supposed to be the one that solved the problems. I'm the one people came to when they had trouble. I was the one that amplified people's voices when they wanted justice. And I didn't know how to do that for myself. And I worked through it, and he had broken my foot because he shoved me. I was leaving an argument. He shoved me from behind. I think I flew 6 feet. All I know is I flew through the air, landed on my foot. It broke. He was sorry, all that. And we stayed together for another 4 years because I was locked in this cycle of, okay, well, you did this to me. You need to take care of me now. And so he wasn't abusive like 100% of the time. I wouldn't have stayed with him if it was like that. Domestic violence is very insidious, pops up now and then, and you forgive and you forgive and you forgive. And finally, when I see that it impacted my daughter, he had lashed out at her verbally, and that was my wake-up call. I left, and I ended up leaving with just my daughter, my car, and that's it. And I ended up in a women's shelter, and I had to rebuild. I took time off from work because, working on a broken foot for that many years, I was in a lot of pain. My health was on decline. And so I was in that shelter with my daughter, and just when I was getting back on my feet again, he insulted me one more time when I went. He didn't contact me, contacted my children, and said I could pick my things, and my children wanted my things, and so I went and he insulted me one more time. But I was in a shelter at this time, and I decided to charge him and went through the process. And the court proceedings were going through, and I already sick, and I had to make a decision whether or not I was going to keep my leg or amputate. I asked them. I was sitting on the bed. They said, gave me my options, and I asked them what's going to end the pain. They said amputation, and decisions. I was supposed to do this, and I did it. And when I decided to amputate, I also I had to tell my mom, and she came in and she cried. My mom was not a crier, and I just felt so bad that I made her cry, and that I promised that something good will happen from this. And I decided that I wouldn't be silent because silence is what created the situation that I ended up in. Being silent about the violence, being silent about the situation, and I promised that any opportunity I would help other women, because I was one of those people that would be quick to say, "Oh, just leave them," until I was in that situation where I understood that it wasn't that easy. especially when you become financially dependent on the person. Leaving becomes less easy. And so when I look at NMIW now, it's a different aspect. Whereas as a journalist, I was amplifying the voices of women who suffered, women, families who lost their loved ones. And looking back, I realized how close I came many, many times to being one of those people that didn't come home. And so now in my new role, I'm still a journalist, I'm now an editor, I assign the stories, and I'm a business owner, and I refuse to let that person take anything more from me. I embrace my new look. I dress it up, obviously. I'm not ashamed of who I am. And when people ask me what happened, I tell them. I tell them that domestic violence did this. A lot of women carry their scars on the inside. Creator decided I'm going to carry it on the outside. So I embrace my new role as an advocate as well. And so any opportunity I have, I come out, I share my story. It's not a nice story, it's not a pretty story, but it's a story that we all need to hear, because I think a lot of what happens to women is we are silenced. We are silenced so much. We're silenced in the justice system. We're silenced in our own families because it's an embarrassment. I have to face that. There's a lot of people that, they still question whether or not I was actually a victim because they didn't see me with bruises on my face. My abuser hid the bruises. It wasn't visible. And so now, I can't hide it. This is what happened. This is what domestic violence did. And I think I'm taking up way too much time, but I will pass it on.
My name is Sheldon Krasowski. I'm from Saskatchewan. I'm not Indigenous, Ukrainian and German descent. I just wanted to thank Kytwayhat, Georgina Musqua for smudging this morning. I can see it's a very, very heavy day, and that gives me strength. And it's so great to see Georgina. We were all very worried about her. She's on our Elders Council. I'm the Director of Research for the Office of the Treaty Commissioner, and she really is the corner pin of our Elders Council, so we were quite worried. I'm glad she's doing well. And I think from NMIW, Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls, and just the conversations from today, what I really take is inspiration. Kerry doesn't know this, but I'm a huge fan, and I've heard her story. And when I first started at the Office of the Treaty Commissioner, I was hired by the previous Treaty Commissioner, Mary Muswell Culbertson, and I wasn't sure if she was going to keep me or not. So I had a conversation with Kerry just before that, which we were talking about earlier, and I was really inspired. And so I reached out to a friend of mine, John Lajumotier, because we went to high school together. And I said, "Well, hey, I'd like to become a journalist. I'd like to write for Eagle Feather News. I don't know if I'm going to be able to have a gig here at the OTC." And he's like, "Well, okay, well, we can't pay you anything, but sure." And so I wrote a couple columns, but it was so hard. It was so difficult, and so I had to give it up. But you definitely inspired me, and I just wanted to say that. And I guess as part of the panel, I'm definitely the one who doesn't belong here, as you could probably tell. I also apologize for not wearing red. I have one red sweater. I have lots of orange. I have like 50 orange t-shirts, but my one red sweater is in the office. And I was working from home yesterday. So I was quite embarrassed this morning when I was searching for it. The other thing that I'll say really quickly is that for missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls, it's really about, it was kind of summarized really well by Colleen in the description for the conference about how it's been accepted. And the elephant in the room is really the role of the police and how that has not been acknowledged. And I'm a researcher, I do researcher, and that's kind of how I always focus on it. And most of the research I do is in Indian residential schools history, but there is a connection because of the role that the police and the priests and the Indian agents played with IRS history. You really see that connection, especially the role of the police with regard to identifying missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. And so one of the things that we had with the Truth and Reconciliation Commission is that the unmarked graves were never part of that mandate, and that inquiry had a very, very narrow mandate. They couldn't even really address the issue of police, and that's why it's ongoing. And my hope is that something like the process we had with the special interlocutor on missing children and unmarked graves, Kimberly Murray, she was given a two-year mandate, which she stretched into 3 to address that. And my hope is that there will be a similar process to follow up the IW process. And I also I asked Dr. Kathy Walker, Trade Commissioner for Saskatchewan, yesterday what we were discussing on the panel, and she mentioned a lot of the work that we do researching the role of the police in our office. And I said, oh my, that's Maria's work, that's not my work. And luckily, Kathy allowed us to bring Maria along as well, because I know nothing about that project, and so I'm glad Maria was able to join us, and I'll pass the microphone on to her.
Fancy Kakio, Maria Nisigusan, Peter Chapman Van, Virginia. My name is Maria, and I am from Peter Chapman Van. As Sheldon was saying, we are working on this project together. I'm working on it with another friend of mine named Tiana, and it's about the First Nations inherent and treaty rights to a self-directed police force. So we haven't directly looked into missing and murdered Indigenous women, girls, and two-spirit individuals, but we have looked into some of the conversations that communities are having about violence from the police, the relationship with the police, what some of their issues are in community. And then I've also looked a little bit about treaty rights as well, outside of those community discussions. So when we look at our treaty rights, I guess the connection that I've made is the land is our mother, and our women were so valued in our communities. And now we see that there is violence and exploitation of the land, and in the same way there's violence and exploitation of Indigenous women, and both of those things are necessary for colonial domination. And I know that our police, they don't protect our women. They don't look for our women. And so we have to take that for ourselves. We have to do that for ourselves because they're not going to do anything to protect us. In community, they do talk about that a lot, like the issues that we're dealing with. They are part of this process, the oppression and the suppression of our treaty inherent rights come from that violence and that exploitation of our lands and of our women. And I guess for myself too, how I relate or how I am impacted by missing and murdered Indigenous women, girls, and two-spirit individuals. I worry about my sisters. I worry about my mom, my aunties, my kukums, my kushis, and I pray for all Indigenous women. I pray for all the women who've gone missing to be found, and all the women who've been murdered to find peace, and for all of their families to get the help that they need. The first time I heard of missing and murdered Indigenous women was when PAGC had put up a sign in Prince Albert showing Happy Charles, and there was her name written there. And ever since I've paid attention more to when there's advocacy work for missing and murdered Indigenous women. And recently I had an auntie who went missing, and there was no one outside of our family seemed to care. And she was found, and she was dead, and we didn't feel like we were getting any help, and afterwards nothing was done to support that's something that we are the only people who are honoring her, and ever since, yeah, just been very impacted by this issue.
Thank you. So I just want to say thank you to all the panelists for so readily sharing so far, like your experiences with this issue and how it's impacted your lives and your work. And I don't want anyone to think that you're oversharing or sharing too much. One of my hopes for this panel in this space was that all of you would feel safe to share your stories. And I think and I hope that, that feeling of safety and security here in this, where we are is that you're being able to share so readily is a testament to that. So don't ever feel like you guys are oversharing. And Sheldon, I was liking you a little bit earlier, but you do belong. Sheldon's a great ally. He's our director of research, and he's the author of a book called No Surrender, The Land Remains Indigenous. So that gives you a little bit of background on Sheldon and where he's coming from. And thanks for sharing on the background there on your work with the self-directed police force feasibility report for the Prince Albert Grand Council. So I forgot to mention that the main purpose of this panel was actually to provide a political, social, firsthand oversight of the landscape of this issue of missing and murdered Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirit. And I feel like we got a pretty good overview of that landscape with the introductory round. But another aspect of this panel, one of the targeted focuses obviously is how this issue is treated by the police, and also within the criminal justice system. And obviously, a lot of you have first-hand experience working within that system, with it, through it, kind of outside of it, from a number of different positions. And so I want to start with that question then. What has your experience been? And what do you think, maybe if you could just identify one or two of the biggest challenges, barriers, or problems with that system, with policing or criminal justice, when it comes to dealing with gender violence. So I'll pass it along here.
I think there's a bigger elephant than the police system. It is actually society at large here in Canada. It's based on a WAS system, which is, of course, you're all educated in this room here, that Western Anglo-Saxon Protestant belief that was brought over from England, and that they put down their own women. Their women were once powerful. They did a good job of doing that, and they carried that thinking over when they came here. You've heard of the Orange Men. Again, too, they were all about the men. It was always men control. That kind of thing, it continues to be quite alive here in Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Manitoba. And there's a lot of history that goes with it, with the movement of the Ku Klux Klan and the German thinking, and not all Germans, but I can't remember the exact route, but that movement across the borders into this area when land became available. Okay, so you look at how people moved and who moved and for what purposes, and that thinking that they continue to bring. We look at what's called a justice system. It's not a justice system. It's not just. It's a law system. It's an enforcement of old English law that continues to be carried on because they're always talking about cases previous. You always have to have precedents, right? So that's the bigger system, and it comes from our society. And there's been many studies done on that system kind of thing, and there has to be more. And I really appreciate that we're looking at the RCMP here, but we also have to look at the system and And it's very discriminating against our people. And it has been for a long time, ever since the very beginning. Like they even allowed the RCMP right up until I was leaving Atakuku, which is like 2016, to actually be prosecutors. You know, we were doing that. This is Saskatchewan, and that wasn't happening in other places. But if you look at Dr. Klein, Candace Klein's PhD thesis, and she does, if my wife had been home, this would never have happened. Incest in Saskatchewan, 1901 to 1931. That is where white men got off because of the system that supported them and that power and those laws at the time. And those continue to today. You know, we continue to build this precedent, and that precedent continues to be supportive of the white male. And of course, that's a system that caused the Indian residential schools, that brainwashed our men to think that they had more power than our women. If you ever look at Dr. Sylvia McAdam, I think she's a doctor, but if you look at her work, all her work is based on the power of the First Nations women, and the research that she grabs from is a Western research, is a contact. Women were powerful. Women were the leaders. Even in our society, like in our language, we don't have a he, she. Our role is what we actually is a gift given to us. In our family, we're police officers, we're justice people. I have two other sisters besides my mother. I have my adopted auntie here. We are considered to be police officers, we're considered to be warriors. There was nothing stopping us from being that. That was a gift, that was our power. So Sylvia McAdam talks about that, about how the suppression happened. As soon as you see the suppression with contact with the Europeans, you see Indian women losing that power. We didn't lose it all because we were great for going underground. So much so that when I was born as Wayakakabin, I was told never to share that name outside of family because of the system that was forced on us, because of the Indian Act. An Indian Act that actually had over 200 criminal laws, not 200, over 200. Yeah, that made Indians criminals, that they could be put in jail, like put in jail for their sending their children to the Indian residential schools, for selling their grain when they're not supposed to, for leaving the reserve, for practicing their beliefs, practicing their way of lives, giving Indian names, kind of thing. All these are based on a system that's not ours, and it's the Canadian system, and it sucks. That's my educated thought on that one. It sucks. And people ask me why I became an RCMP member. Well, just like her, just like my sisters, I wanted to make a difference. I wanted to provide service that was about equality, and sometimes equality is different. Sometimes it's different, and it's all women here and some of the men. Some of that equality is different because you see how you have a race, and white people have this privilege, and the women who support them have this privilege as they're moving through, and they're moving through something, and it's a clear path. You know, you don't have to be white and rich. You can just be white. But I can go into a store and somebody will assume something about me just because of the color of my skin. I have privilege. I'm well-to-do, kind of thing, because she taught me how to work hard, taught me how to save money, taught me how to stand on my own 2 feet. But when I walk in that store, I get the stereotypes put on me, right? And that comes from settlers and immigrants. They have to open their eyes. First Nations is first because this is our home. When people tell you to go home, it's like, I'm home. Anywhere on Turtle Island. Okay, so that is the biggest problem. Not just changing the system, you have to change people's way of thinking. You have to change everybody's way of thinking. And the thing is, you have to look at your own prejudice, your own discrimination, where you came from, where's that thinking coming from? Before you start thinking that you could become culturally humidity or not? Yes, sorry. It's so important. You know, I cannot stand when people sit there and they say, well, I studied in Indian studies, I have this many classes, and they're sitting there as a white person, and they're trying to educate me. It's embarrassing, you're embarrassing yourself. If you really want to know about our people, you come to us. You really want to know about Black people and their history, you go to them. They're the experts. You wanna know about women issues? You talk to a woman, she can tell you those issues, right? And there's all that intersectionality that goes on, all those things that we have to take into consideration. So, I'll shut up now. Which, planning university.
Maybe we need to take a break. What was the question again, Kathy, about what we have? It's funny, you know, some of the, when they say you have chemo, it kind of affects some of your, I think, some of your brain cells. You know, so, but anyway, where I come from, we do have a lot of women who went missing here in Saskatchewan, and some who died suspicious deaths, but those were never, you know, given proper attention. And I think, when I was in the police force, you know, most times the only thing you could do is put the person's name on a system as missing. But the good thing now I notice is that there are bulletins out there, like big posters saying so and so is missing, like Ashley Moran, Alicia Addison came back in Meadow Lake, and I noticed these great big signs, you know, at points where you have to stop because there's a stop sign. And so you quickly look at it, and it's in big, bold writing, so you could read it. You don't have to squint or put your, you know, glasses on. And so that's a good thing with media, you know. And you know, these young people nowadays, everything is, you know, they're always on their cell phones, right? And I think that's whoever was talking about cyber security, and that's where it needs to keep hitting these people, you know, these young people, because that's their method of communication. And I think too, the biggest thing with us women at the grassroots level is the sometimes we don't feel safe with each other, meaning we tend to, I think, pick on each other. I don't know how to say it. You know, we're not together, we're not unified, and we need to start trusting each other instead of kind of, you know, that gossip is the worst thing. Yeah. And we need to be able to talk, and so that's what I'm getting these women to start having their get-togethers, and that's what we should talk about. And I know, you know, that statue that's in front of the police department here in Saskatoon, Amber Redman. I was in Regina at the time, stationed Regina, so I was part of the people who went searching for her. And it is such a helpless feeling because you don't know where to start. And her mom, Kenta Yoshitiki, actually consulted with a psychic, and the psychic would say, go southeast. And to me, you know, I think we were going too much south instead of southeast. And in the end, that was where her remains were found, in the southeast, more in the east end. And you know, I always, when I see that statue when I'm driving by that place, it just brings those memories. And I know there's some other women I know who are still missing, just by North Alfred area. And I really, you know, that one woman, I haven't seen her picture on a poster. I don't know why her picture is not on a big poster somewhere. Because somebody knows where her remains are, because this came back in the 1980s when she went missing. So I'm sure she was still alive. She would contact her family. And what's being done, you know, like us at home, myself, we're mostly, when we go to ceremonies, we're praying for everyone, not just us. We pray for everyone, all the sick, all the people in jails, and all the kids, all the women. That's the only thing we could do. That's what sometimes we say, that's the only thing we could do now. We cannot, you know, like my age, I cannot go any long and trying to find people. I could only pray for people and for everyone. And, you know, I do feel for these young women, and we need to start getting in touch with them so that they have someone to talk to when they're feeling in crises. Because we have a lot of suicides, we have a lot of overdoses, we have a lot of, young people taking their lives. And these are just beautiful young people. They haven't even started living their lives, and yet they cannot seem to find a purpose in their lives. And I think maybe that's part of the media that needs to be involved, part of communication. Communication is the biggest thing, and communicating with each other, with different departments, with different sections, with the, academia, trying to maybe getting in touch with the grassroots more, just putting comments out there and making these people feel part of society that makes sense. Yeah, that's thing that I covered.
And I think the question was around the justice system and police and MIW. I would have to say, when I worked at CBC and CTV, I had the privilege of telling stories about our people since 2005, solidly. And I witnessed, I feel like I was a front of the line witness of how the calls for the inquiry to missing and murdered women inquiry happened. I was there and I saw how it unfolded and all that. But during that time, since 2005 until I left journalism completely, I've told probably over 200 stories around the issue, maybe around there. And I've also done a documentary around this issue as well. So I've interviewed a lot of families and a lot of relatives, survivors, allies, and I have to say the underlying and common thread of all of the stories is police, and how police disregarded these women and their stories, and their interactions were always negative with police. They were always either made fun of or told to wait a few days, maybe they're just on a drunken bender, or maybe they went on vacation, and the family knows darn well they only have $5 in their pocket and they'll never have enough money for a vacation, but the police were just so dismissive and disrespectful that they said they went on vacation, and instead of going to look for them. I've done stories on these, and one family particularly became like really close friends from telling their story, and that's exactly what happened. This woman started putting posters up all over Winnipeg in 2009, and I saw the poster on Hydropole, and I called her number, and I asked her what was going on. She said she hadn't seen her sister for 10 days. And I said, did you call police? And they said, yes. They said, that's what they told her. It was, oh, she went on vacation. And she said she only had $5. She was out to go get a drink and come back. And I asked my friend if I could share this story with her, with you. And when I asked her what police said, they said, that's what their response was, that she's probably on vacation. It wasn't until we did the story on CBC that the police went to her again and said, okay, tell us what happened. And then they started doing, a call out for finding her. They never did find her, and she is presumed to be in one of the landfills in Winnipeg. And we don't know that for sure because she's one of the ones in the Brady Road landfill, which is just outside Winnipeg. That the serial killers claimed that he took 3 women and she was one of them, but her body was never found. And that's still an ongoing issue. And my friend, who is an amazing person, who doesn't feel she's an amazing person, but she is. She's carried the burden of that story in her family for many years. And when I was working with her, I was getting into the advocacy part as a communications person at the time. I saw her transforming to a woman who we probably all know, she didn't grow up educated. She didn't even finish high school. At her age, which is close to mine, I think we're the same age actually, she had an opportunity to go to Ottawa at one point to be an advocate and to be a spokesperson. She just became an organically well-spoken spokesperson, and she couldn't get on the plane because when she got to the airport and presented herself, it didn't even dawn on her that she needed ID to get on the plane. And this is the reality for a lot of our women because we've been just, cut out of a lot of systems and not deemed important enough to have anything like that to be, the basic things that we all take for granted. And she didn't even have that. She was so embarrassed and she was hurt that she was turned away at the airport. There was resolution a few days later. We helped her, an organization helped her get her ID, and then she did get on the plane and she did go speak. And I saw the strength in her. She was so bold, she was so strong, she said the right things. And yet at the same time, she was at home trying to keep her kids with her. She had little kids, and it was a struggle for her to be in this new role, to be a good person, an advocate for her sister, an advocate for the issue, and meanwhile trying to keep her family intact. And the CFS was always checking in on her. Every day they would say, "Did you feed your kids? Let me see their fingernails," all these things. They were always threatening to take. And when they finally did take her kids away, she gave up. And she went on the streets. And, I lost track of her for months. And at the time, I was also running to be a Grand Chief. And when I finally got, after the election, I went to look for her. And I found her. And I told her that I was Grand Chief, and we both cried. And we've been staying connected ever since. But I have to say how strong she was until she lost connection with her kids. When the system took her kids away, she lost, it felt like, for a short time, motivation to do anything, motivation to even stand up for herself, motivation to just eat and to be, because that happens time and time again throughout different parts of our lives, right, as women, Indigenous women. And I'm reminded of a lot of stories that I've heard over the years. This Indigenous man from the States taught me this lesson that I've been carrying around, and I don't share it with a lot of people, but I started to share it a little bit because it's controversial. And the last time I shared it was in front of our Premier, Manitoba Premier. I won't say it there. But we used to work together at CBC too. But the story is, our women were so strong and powerful, as you heard and as you know, because you're allies and you're advocates for all of our lives, our generations, and our ancestors, our women were our powerhouses. But when settlers came, this is part of the story, when settlers came to our lands and they were met with the women that were there to protect the people and to say, what's your business here? The men said they felt uncomfortable dealing with our women. And they said, we want to talk to the men. So the men came forward, and then they started dealing with them. And then they started pushing women back into the background. And what this elder man told me was that, and this is the controversial part, is that our men, Indigenous men, prostituted our sovereignty for power. They traded our sovereignty for trinkets and beads and power. And it turned our community and our livelihood and our existence upside down to the point where it still affects us today. And I'm glad a man said it, not me, and not a woman said it. But I still feel it. I felt it as a leader, as an Indigenous woman, many times in large boardrooms with just men, sometimes mostly just white men. I felt that imbalance, and I felt the intimidation that they try to put on you. A couple of times in my first few months as a Grand Chief, I'd go to a meeting with my male assistant, and the men in the government were always more comfortable to talk to him and to address him. And then I'd have to say, excuse me, I'm over here. But that happened over and over again, and they learned, and we've all learned to also disregard our women. But I think the word you're looking for also was lateral violence sometimes. We're made to compete with each other. We're made to look down on each other sometimes as women, because that's been the history that's been taught to us, and it's in our system and in our DNA. And I feel that's changing though. I feel like we're taking that power back, and we're taking our roles back as leaders and as protectors of our communities. And domestic violence. I was in an abusive relationship as well for 7 years, and I know exactly the stories that you're talking about. I had a barbell smash my toe a few times, and I think, oh my God, that could have been me, what you just described, your story. And thankfully, I'm thankful it didn't get to that point, but we have shared history. But at the same time, I love our men. Our men need healing, our men need us, the world needs our men. I'll never talk down about our men. My dad, my late father, was an incredible leader. I have many great Indigenous friends. Some of my best friends are Indigenous men. So I don't want to sound like I'm against our own men, but I have seen the hardships and the discomfort that we have with our relationships with them. One of the first meetings I had with a group of chiefs when I was Grand Chief was everyone shook my hand, but the last guy at the end didn't shake my hand. He went like this instead, to sit on his lap. And thankfully, a woman counselor, or a woman chief saw him as she was walking out, and she said, "Don't you ever talk to her like that? What do you think you're doing?" And I didn't bring it out in any other way because I felt that she dealt with it at that moment. But ever since then, that chief has been terrible to me as a person. Has never even looked at me ever since. Like it was my fault that I did that to him. And part of my whole work as a leader was always impacted by that. And some of the men would huddle around and be together and say that she's a man hater, she's a blah blah blah. That's followed me ever since, even now. Which is probably why I lost a few elections. And I'm okay with that because losing also, I learned a lot from all of that. And I don't feel like our story is over and our journey continues. And And one last thing I'll say about the RCMP that I have experienced, and I've been part of committees internally at RCMP with incredible people from across this country. And one of the things that we gave them feedback on, just as the inquiry was ramping up, was their forms and how they interact with our people. It was surprising to see the intake forms that RCMP used to have. Very racist in some ways, policy-wise, and the way the practice that they use to gather information and make assumptions, and even media. When I started in the media in 2005, we were still calling victims prostitutes, street workers, and hookers, and all of that. But when I started talking to families at the time, they said, "I'm not going to tell my story unless you show this picture and say that so-and-so was loved, she was my auntie, she was my sister. If you say she was a hooker and all that, I don't want to talk to you." And so I would go back to the newsroom and say that, and I'd have pushback from editors at the time and say, "This is the reality, these are facts, this is their lifestyle, blah, blah, blah." But, there is integrity that we had to uphold, and I started pushing back as well. And I said, "I'm embarrassed to be part of this organization," and say stuff like that. And thankfully, we started listening and growing together, and from 2005 until I left in 2012 at CBC, I saw a big transformation. Women were not called that anymore. They used mugshots to tell who she was. And even at the time, male chiefs stopped saying that this is a woman's issue. When the chiefs gathering, a female chief would bring out a story or something that needed some resolution or attention, some of the male chiefs at the time would say, "This is a woman's issue, take it to another room." But I don't think they hear a man chief say that anymore today, thanks to the power of our people and our women who marched relentlessly from 2005 when I started paying attention to 2012 to 2015 when it became a national election issue in 2015. That's why Trudeau got elected, because of Idle Moore's help and the women's help to push for the inquiry. So Justin Trudeau has a lot of thanks that he owes to our people and our women for having the legacy that he ended up with. Not that to say anything is perfect now, a lot of things are still the same. But, our women are powerful and we made this happen. I've been to the United Nations a few times as a delegate, And women from around the world came to us as Indigenous women from our lands and said, how did you make this a national election issue? How did you make this worldwide known that this issue is going on in Canada? And I always had to point to the women and how they were relentless in marches and walks and vigils. Sometimes there was 3 people, sometimes there was 3,000, there was minus 30, plus 30, it didn't matter. Moms and babies were there. And they marched across our country to raise awareness, and that is why I believe we are all aware of this conversation, because of the work that our people and our women did, and I was proud to say I'm a witness of that. And yeah, so anyway, thanks.
What was the question? Oh, justice and policing. I have a really different take on justice and policing when it comes to. I'm going to relate it back to my own personal story of domestic violence. The very first time I was ever assaulted, I called the police. 2 weeks later, they still hadn't interviewed him. And in that 2 weeks, he bombarded me with apologies. I learned that was called love bombing. And eventually, I just, I gave up on the police. And the next time it happened, I was reluctant to even contact them. And because I was already shown that they didn't care. I went to the hospital, they had my records, they had, that was the first time he assaulted me, he left physical bruises on my face, got it documented, went to the hospital. They called the social worker, they called the police, they didn't show up. 2 weeks later, the police still didn't show up after I wrote the statement, and it told me that the police weren't there to protect me. And so I didn't rely on them for protection. And when everything happened and I had to make a decision, I knew that he would never leave me alone. I also knew from my experience that he was also scared of the justice system as an Indigenous man. I knew I had to protect myself. I also knew Claire's Law, and I made that decision to pursue charges against him the very last time he assaulted me while I was in the women's shelter, but this time I had an advocate with me. I had a woman from the shelter who went with me. We filed a report. It was taken completely differently. They followed up. They answered because I had an advocate with me. And I had to fight for my day in court. One of the problems with the system is, they say victim services, go to victim services, but you'd be surprised at how victim services, policing, prosecutors and defense, they're all just friends. They all know each other. And the very first, after I charged him, I was approached by victim services, like, oh, well, you could do this, just get an extended peace bond against him. That way you don't have to go to court. It won't be so traumatic. You don't have to go through this. And I was like, no, I want my day in court. I had to repeatedly tell them I wanted my day in court. Prosecutor called me, not twice, but 3 times to say he didn't want to traumatize me. It's going to be really difficult to go to court. I was like, I want my day in court. I had 1 day in court, and then they adjourned it for 4 months. And by that time, I had gone through the surgery, and I got out, and they told me that they decided that they weren't going to have day 2, and that they gave them an extended peace bond. So all of that fighting, they still got what they wanted, but I still got my day in court. And so it's on record. But the amount of fighting that I had to do, the amount of advocating I had to do on my own, I can understand why the statistics are so low when they tell me, like, I think over 90% of women who file a charge against their abuser never show up in court. But they don't say, you have to fight the whole system to get your day in court. That's not in the statistics. They just simply say women don't show up. And if it weren't for the fact that I was college educated, I had a large network of very powerful women who were still behind me, supported me. And if I didn't use my voice, I wouldn't have got that day in court. I was terrified, but I knew that I wanted that day in court. And when I talked about Claire's Law, the prosecutor didn't have an idea what it was. And that's when I learned that, the system is not designed for not only Indigenous women, but women in general. We are sloughed off, we are ignored, we are coddled, we are patted on our back, oh, there, we'll take care of it kind of thing. But we have to stand up and advocate for ourselves. And I have to think, what would have happened had the police came that very first time. But I think Creator doesn't make mistakes. And there was a reason I was given this story. There is a reason it happened to me. There's a reason why I carry my scars on the outside. I think because I do have that strong network. I do have that education. I do have the ability to use story to create change. I understand the power of social media, understand the power of media, and I am very privileged in the fact that I do have my education, I do have a large network, and I do have the knowledge that comes with being a journalist for more than 20 years. I know the players in the game. I know how to advocate, and I think that there was a reason that this story was given to me, and so I can elaborate on the system that is broken, the system that doesn't protect me as an Indigenous woman, but also doesn't protect me as a woman, period. And I think that if we want change, if we want to do something, it's up to us. Like Sheila said, it's up to us to make those changes. And we need to move past these barriers of Indigenous, non-Indigenous. We have to work together to change a system that is broken. The justice system is broken. Right now, there's currently a Regina police officer going through the court system because he was accessing databases and contacting women who were victims and women he just had no contact with, but he was using police resources to target women. And, there's something there that is saying, if there was a story in the Globe and Mail, and the lady left the city and she moved to another province, and she said, where do you go when the people who are supposed to protect you is the person who did this? That is a really scary thing. We have put the police on a pedestal. They are untouchable. And I think they are also untouchable. But when I look at it, they are just humans. They are prone to error. And we have to get rid of that whole idea that, just because they are police officers, they are untouchable. And, our information, that the databases this man was accessing, there should be more protection. They should not operate on an honor system. All they have to do is say, okay, well, I won't access your file for my own person. I will look you up, find your your number and your address and, casually meet you somehow. That is our private information. Not everybody should have access to it. Back in the day, evidence rooms operated on the honor system. Police were allowed to go in there. All they had to do is, I have to do this and do that. But there was so much corruption that happened, evidence being stolen, evidence being lost. They changed the laws. And now there's a lot of bureaucracy. There's a lot of checks and balances. They can't easily access that information. I think our privacy, our protection as women is just as valuable as, a bag of cocaine, that they changed the laws to protect the bag of cocaine. Those laws need to be changed to protect us as well. Because that's really disturbing that these men that are supposed to be protecting us are using those informations to prey on us. And so as I go through the whole system and, thinking about justice and, there's a lot of things that need to happen. There's a lot of things that need to change. And yeah, there's just so much that needs to change. We need to come together, we need to unite, and we need to force those changes. Because until we force it, nothing will happen. Just like the MMIW, it was the women who stood up, the women who marched, the allies who marched beside them, the academics who held conferences and workshops. I covered those as well. They raised awareness. And I too seen it grow. I seen it change and evolve to the point where, Trudeau was elected. And I talked to a lot of families who were very happy that the National Choir was going to be held. And I also talked to families after it was held and the disappointment of, what is next. And so, but the issue is still there. Everybody knows about it, and it's important. And I think this is just another issue we as women, we as allies, we as people have to push forward and make changes, because it's a very scary situation right now if, our safety is in question by the very people who are supposed to protect us.
I was hoping to just hide behind Maria and not have to speak, but I didn't know that we could do this around. I guess as a non-Indigenous person, the only thing I would say about policing is that I had an uncle, Peter Krasowski, who the story was always told that he wanted to be a police officer when he was young, and he tried many times to get into the police force, but they didn't let him in because he was Ukrainian, because they were racist and they wouldn't accept him. So for my family, we were always told to not trust the police, so I always avoided them. But I was actually just telling a story to Maria yesterday, and luckily I have a story to tell because we were chatting yesterday. I think for non-Indigenous people, unless you experience the the racism and the way that the police view First Nations, you can't understand it. And I only understand it a little bit. The story I told Maria is I was teaching at Vancouver Island University, and there were a lot of Stunitnuk and Alcamatum individuals who were part of the West Coast Warrior Society, and they were also protesting, and so they never got their assignments in. So as punishment, they had to go to the provincial archives in Victoria with me in the summer and do research. The funny part of the story is that we had CSIS officers follow us in downtown Victoria for the whole summer, tracking the West Coast Warrior people. And of course, they always teased me because now they had a file on me because I was leading all these protesters all summer. And then when I was hired at the Office of the Treaty Commissioner, our offices are on English River First Nation, which is urban, I guess it's urban reserve. And one of the things I noticed right away when I was driving onto the reserve to go into the office is I was okay driver. I didn't really get any tickets. I didn't have any points against my license. And I think my first week I got a ticket for driving 71 in a 60 zone, turning into the reserve. The next week I got a ticket for going through the stop sign to leave, which it's basically a mall. They could give someone a ticket for going through a stop sign in a mall. And so the next thing I knew it, 5 or 6 tickets later, I barely was able to get my driver's license and I had to go to traffic school. So just to see like that is a very small example of the kind of the way that the police views, and I'm a white guy driving, but because I'm driving into the First Nations Urban Reserve, that's the kind of pressure that's on. And of course there's lots of complaints about how the police target individuals, but unless you actually experience it, it's really hard to describe. You could almost think of it as, oh, those are one-offs, or that, oh, that can't happen all the time. But it does. It happens all the time. And I don't really hang out with white people anymore. When I go shopping with First Nations people, we're always followed in stores. When I go with Benjoe, and he always just looks around, and he's like, yeah, there they are again. So it's just difficult to understand unless you experience it yourself, that constant racist targeting by the police. So I guess that's an example that Dr. Kempy Walker asked for. I'll hide on Korea again.
I didn't ask for that example. Thanks, Sheldon.
And again.
Yeah, I am just trying to talk about what the communities are saying, I guess, more or less, not really my own perspective, but the communities don't trust the police. Oh, I'm sorry. The communities the First Nation communities that I had the chance to hear, they don't trust the police. And they don't trust the police because when they put in something called a BCR, it's a band council request, I believe, they say, oh, resolution. And I can't remember what it was, sorry, thank you. They tried to get the police to uphold those agreements and enforce those agreements that they make with them. And so sometimes it'll be, we want a quicker response time from the police, from the RCMP, and they don't do that. Like, especially up north, it'll take days for them to come and handle the situation that happened a long time ago. And then there's requests where they're saying, you need to treat our women better, and our children, and not be so violent with them, but they still do. They'll still manhandle them and treat like a 10-year-old like it's a big man who you have to really handle, and it's scary. So people don't even want to call the police anymore. They don't even want to call the RCMP because they know that they're not going to help them, and then if they do help them, they're going to be extremely violent with them. So a lot of these communities, they talk about that bad relationship throughout history with the RCMP. And so those are some of the things that they're talking about in the communities. And I guess how they want to address these is by going back to our old ways, like you had said before, Karen, that women used to be the ones who would take care of other women. And then the men would also be the ones who were like policing the men in those communities. And they want to return to that because women had their power, and rather than having a man have power over them, they were able to protect each other, and then there was that trust too. You could trust the women in your community because you knew them, and you all raised your children together, and you knew each other like from your family. So I kind of forget what the question was as well, but that is what I'll add.
Thank you all for that. I have also forgotten what the question was. I'm just kidding. I think we're probably out of time. Am I right, Colleen? Yes, unfortunately. But I know Karen wanted to say one thing in response, so I'm just gonna let you.
It's not, it's actually not a response to the RCMP because once again, you're always constantly fighting. During my careers with the Regina Police Service and the RCMP, I always had white members trying to get me out. Always. So it's, again, to that was a constant. My investigation, my older sister Ivy, who my mother spoke about in 1982, became a police officer, and when she was sitting in one of these rooms with a corporal who we would consider now, I'd say, you just have to realize being in RCMP kind of thing, and who you are, you'll always just be an Indian woman. And that's how they're going to see you. That didn't change through the decades. And I think even when after I had a male police officer driving around with me, he said, just want to say I admire your work. He goes, we had other Indian women working here and they were weak, they were this, and you're this. And I said, well, obviously you don't know many Indian women, because I can tell you I know a lot of Indian women who are quite strong. And other comments that were constantly made, kind of thing, and stuff that was done. That's why you have right now, you have the class action suit by Indigenous members against the RCMP. Previous to that, you had the class action by women. I didn't join the women one because sexism and racism was a double-edged sword for people like my sisters, my mother, and Emma. Not just being an Indian, you're an Indian woman, right? So it was a constant battle all the time. And one of the reasons I left, somebody said, why did you retire? So number one, I didn't want anybody to push me out. For me, it was to prove that I am going to make a change. I'm going to make sure I use my voice. I'm going to put people in their places. I'm going to make my members accountable to me. I was definitely going to become a supervisor. That was my goal, because I was wanting to make sure that when people were policing in my community, providing policing services, that they were providing it right, because I always wanted to work with First Nations. I always wanted to make the members accountable to their actions and hold them accountable. And I was never a police officer, or how do you say, I was never a cop's cop. I was a people's cop. And that's one of the things my sister spoke about. If you're a people's cop, you're not going to be like the police. You're always going to be an outsider. You will never have one of you want the culture. You will not be absorbed into that culture. I didn't want it because I wanted that culture. It was racist. You know, it wasn't working in RCMP or what. You know, that's a word ground kind of thing. So it's a constant fight no matter where you go, right? So even though you might be sitting here as RCMP members and retired RCMP members, it was a constant battle within. You know? And you pick your allies. You would look for the allies that you can trust, or you can change people's thinking. Well, the other thing is doing that. If they were willing to change, because of course we know how that goes, right? Everybody wants to be the good old boys. That's the RCMP. That's the Saskatchewan police force and their China police force. I was with their China police force. They're the good old boys. And that mentality comes from the system and the society we live in. These provinces are all good old boys. Which I understand.
Thank you so much for that. So, unfortunately, we are out of time, but for the sake of closing off the circle that we've made here in a good way, I do just want to offer the mic and invite you all to say, you know, share one closing thought, one thing that you'd like to share, leave everyone with, and then we can end it there. So I'm just going to say thank you all so much for sharing your stories and your experiences. I've learned a lot, and I find you all very inspiring, and you know, and very for the journeys that you've shared with us, and what you've done to work within, through, around, and under these systems, and to change them. Thank you.
I want to do the same as Kathy. I want to thank everybody else here who sits here and kind of thing. So,
Yes, good to be here. It's a good energy. And I think as women, or maybe men too, I don't know, I haven't spoken, but we have strong intuition. And when I got asked here, I didn't know if I should come, because I'm a keeper of some ceremony. That's the Sundance we have every summer. So I cannot leave my house where everything is overnight. You know, I'm a keeper. So I asked, they sent this message, you know, up wherever it is, and And I was looking for my nephew. My nephew goes back and forth to Big Island Lake First Nation dwellers. And he was, I was looking for him because I thought he could come and stay at my place and keep everything safe. And I did ask my brother, is it okay for me to leave overnight? And he said, yeah, it's okay for you to leave overnight. And then the other day, I was telling my sister, I had this dream. I dreamt about this young man in my dream. He was, tall, skinny, and dark hair. And he came and talked to me, what he said. But anyway, then I gave him something in this dream, and then I woke up. And then soon after, my nephew phones me. He says, oh, I'm at Kevin's place. Do you have any cigarettes? And of course, I always have tobacco, right? And I said, yes, I do. And then he comes over and gave him a pack of cigarettes. And I said, I need you to stay here, or at least to keep coming every morning and check the house and check these things and smudge this place. And he said, okay. And he, so I thought, okay, so I'm meant to come here, to be here. That was the message I had. And then, but once I got here, oh my God, I had so much problems. There was this construction, and then I didn't know where this place was. And then I had to ask people on the street, where is this really place? Or I don't know how to pronounce it. And then I asked, there was only one sort of negative reception I had, because I went into the Persephone and I asked a person who was a woman, and I think she kind of thought I was a street person, and most people mistake me as a street person, which is kind of good because this way I know how street people are treated, right? And sometimes, like I'm dressed scruffy or everyday stuff, and just the way my manner is, so she says, I don't know where that place is, and I know I was around the corner somewhere. And so I left. I didn't say nothing. I just left. And I did manage to go to the bus stop. And I asked the woman there. And she says, oh, it's right there. And she took me almost to the door. So, there is a lot of kind people out there. And so be kind to each other. What I'm saying, be kind to each other. Because a lot of communication comes non-verbal. It's through the eyes. It's through the look. It's through the reception you give people. Thank you. Except.
Because again, that's when still have raised Kytwayhat. And I thank all of you for letting me share the stage with you all, and all of you for taking time to come and be with us all and allowing us to visit. I also want to say, I'm proud to be part of a group of women, a group of people, Indigenous people, that learn the hard way. I'm not an academic. I work at the University of Winnipeg, but I'm definitely not an academic. You guys are weird. Just kidding. But as a journalist, that's where I feel like I became a mom at such a young age, and then I just started living life, being a journalist, and hearing about all these things. So I didn't take any formal classes on history. I just learned along the way. And somehow I became a grand chief and had to fight the government and other powers to stand up for our people. But I never took the class. And so I just wanted to mention, this book right here, I'm not promoting this book, Indigenous lawyer Bruce McIver. He kind of summarized all the things that I've learned in passing and kind of gave me Cole's notes of the history of our people and how the world came to be the way it is here in Canada. And so I'm so grateful for it. I'm going to be a moderator when he comes to Winnipeg. So I just wanted to say, I represent a group of women who did get a formal education, but somehow we're here. I'm on this panel with these incredible people in this conference because I'm here on the power of prayer and the power of people that saw themselves as important. And so I also feel privileged, and because I'm a journalist, selfless promotion. I also have a book. It's called My Privilege, My Responsibility. And it's exactly that. I feel privileged to have a good life that I get to live, and I have a responsibility to share it wherever I can. So thank you for your time, and I'm very grateful. And last week,
I'll keep it short. I'm just really honored to be here, to be sitting alongside these incredible women and Sheldon. Thank you for listening. I know I talk a lot sometimes. I just let story come out when it comes out, and that's what came out. And yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks, many thanks to allowing me to be on this panel. I learned so much, and I do take inspiration from all of you and from all of your stories. It is both the work that you've done and the resilience to fight through everything that you fight through and still do that work. That is incredibly inspirational. Whenever I get down, like what, for me and for other people, like what are we gonna face, right? And so for me, it's always that inspiration that gets me working, do all projects that Dr. Walker throws on my desk without complaining. And so yeah, definitely, it's that inspiration that I appreciate so much.
Excellent. Thank you all for sharing your stories and your experiences. I really believe that it's women's experiences that are going to make these changes. Especially, it's always Indigenous women who are the ones who have to bring up these discussions, which is unfortunate because it should be the men as well. It should be non-Indigenous people as well who are talking about these issues. So thank you so much for bringing awareness and for sharing your knowledge with us.
Oh, sorry. Thank you. I think that concludes our panel now. Pass it on to Colleen.